Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm just going to give it a minute for everyone to connect and join to the call. And once we've done that, we will get started, but we'll be with you very shortly.
Good evening.
Hey there, Tom. How's it going?
Hi, Jake. I'm good. How are you?
Really good. And it's great to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining.
My pleasure.
So I'm just going to see if we can get Mario here to join us on the panel. I think he's here. Here we go. And then we should be good to start.
Excellent.
Are you there, Mario? Well, I think so. I can see him on here anyway, so I'm going to assume he's...
Sorry,
So,
I am here. Yes, I am here. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Fine. And you?
I'm good. I'm very excited for tonight. So yeah, I'll kick us off quickly, and then without further ado, I'll get out of the way so you can speak, Tom. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our last event of the year, our last London Games Network, but it's really exciting to have you all with us again for another great evening. We've got some amazing speakers lined up for you today. So firstly, we've got Tom Wyman from Newzoo. He's a senior games markets analyst there. He's going to be talking on something that I think is very topical at the moment around COVID-19 and the impact on the games industry. Afterwards, we will have Mario Nieto, who is our senior Unity developer here at Product Madness. Really happy to have you with us today as well. And he will be speaking with his talk, No Time to Lose. So I'm really excited to hear that as well. Just a little bit about the event as well. So we have this as a panel so that you can hear the speaker talk at the bottom of the page. Any questions that you have, I'll ask to the speakers at the end. And then what we can do from there is obviously get your questions answered. So we'll wait till the end of the session, but please do put your questions in the Q&A box and I'll be sure to ask them to the speakers after their talks. And finally, do follow us on social media. We're using a hashtag London Games Network, which admittedly is quite long. I think we need to do something with that to make it a little bit more snappy, but that's what we're using at the moment. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to get out of your way, Tom. But thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, let's clear the screen. Tom, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Jake. Thank you for the introduction. Let me share the presentation for today. Can someone confirm whether they are actually seeing my presentation?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. So thank you, Jake, for the introduction. As I said, so today I'll be speaking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on the games market. And before I dive into it, start off right there by two things. First, acknowledging that we're lucky enough to happy enough, and we're lucky enough to work in a market that actually saw a positive effect of the pandemic. And the second thing that I'm clarifying is that everywhere we're talking about COVID-19 and the impact on the games market, but actually the better wording for this title should have been lockdowns and the impact on the games market, because it's not about the actual illness, it's about people staying at home, people not being able to go out as they would, and the effect that has had on the games market. So before I start, Jake already introduced myself, so I'll quickly go past that. But I'm senior market analyst at Newzoo. I am responsible for our games market sizing and our global games market report. Hopefully, at least most, if not some of you know what I'm talking about, where that's coming from. Who is Newzoo? What do we do? Well, we're a specialized data and analytics firm for the games and esports market. You might recognize us from the big numbers flying around on the games market, possibly esports if you're into that market as well. what we do can basically be split in three things. Our platform is really our destination for all this market data, some of which I'll be sharing today, but also game level data. And I'll be presenting some of that throughout the presentation so you have kind of an idea. We run the world's largest survey among gamers yearly, but also smaller ones. And that way we help understand consumer engagement, profiling, etc. And finally, we also do some customer consulting projects, building on the expertise that we've built up on games and esports. Now, before I dive into the impact it has had, I wanted to get everybody on the same level. What are we looking at for the games markets this year? And these are the numbers that we've updated in October. So they this October. So these include most of the effect that the lockdowns have had on the market. So first of all, the games market, the way we look at it, this is consumer spending on gaming software, and that's 174.9 billion this year. So we're in a massive market. Probably most of the people on this call will know that, but just getting the figures out there. That almost 20% growth that you see there as well, here in the middle, that's remarkable. This is the fastest growth for the entire market that we at Newzoo have seen since we started reporting on this in 2011. So highest growth in 10 years, quite possibly the highest growth in longer. Looking at that per segment or player platform, mobile takes up almost half of the market. People will spend 86.3 billion on mobile games this year, and it's also the fastest growing segment. Second fastest growing and second biggest segment is the console segment. Obviously, that got a boost this year due to the next generation consoles. And the third largest, but still very sizable part of the market is the PC gaming market at 37.4 billion, growing. Normally, I'd say that's a very healthy 6.2%, but if you compare it to the rest of the market, it's not as impressive, but it's still very good. Now, setting the record straight a bit more, let's look at the same number, but per region. You might notice, and this is more of a surprise to some people, that Asia Pacific is almost half of the market, 48% this year. Simply put, there's a lot of gamers there, and it's also some of the most dedicated gaming crowds out there. Talking specifically about countries like Japan, China, South Korea, but also growth markets, Southeast Asia, India, that are contributing both to that total number, but also the growth rate. Then the other regions in the world, it's more or less logically split. North America is the second largest market region, just over a quarter of the global games market. And the rest is split between mostly Europe and some for Latin America and Middle East and Africa. Although I have to point out that Middle East and Africa is forecasted to be the fastest growing region this year. Some more facts so that we're all on the same page. That 174 billion will be generated through, well, that's not entirely fair, but through 2.7 billion players worldwide. Now, admittedly, not all 2.7 billion of those will be spending money on games, but it's a massive number. And again, what I want to point out here is, but I think given that this will be also an audience that is very familiar with the strength and the power of mobile gaming, but something that we mostly share with our more traditional publishers, those that operate on the PC and console side, like the idea of what a gamer is, the traditional idea is quite outdated. There are not 2.7 billion white males between their 18 and 34 out there, so that makes a lot of sense. So the idea that someone is a gamer, that the gamer is one persona, that's very outdated. And I think this, more than anything, shows that there's 2.7 billion. That's probably about 1.1 out of every 3 persons in the world is a player this year. Again, not surprising, perhaps, seeing the last slide. The majority of those live in Asia Pacific. It's also where the majority of people in the world live, so not as much of a surprise. And the rest of the player base is roughly equally split along the other regions. Here we do see that, for example, North America spends a lot more on average than the rest because it's just 8% of global players, but 26% of the revenues. And this one, very briefly, just to see how that is per market. So China is the biggest market by gaming spending, followed by the United States, Japan, South Korea, Germany, many other European countries, and Canada as well. Now, the reason why I wanted to share this, like I said, first of all, get everybody on the same page. What games market are we talking about? How big is that actually? But this is also to show that when I start talking about the impact that COVID has had on the market, and what that means is that kind of like COVID, games is a global thing. And due to how lockdowns were handled differently across the world, you see quite some differences in how the games market reacted to it anyway. So those were the numbers. I mean, it's a Newzoo presentation. I have to include numbers. But let's look at the main topic of today. And that's lockdowns. And as the title here implies, lockdowns, it's a double-edged sword. I'm going to be sharing a lot of positives here, but in the end, there are some downsides as well. So maybe we leave slightly on the downer, but we'll see where we end. First of all, what happened in the first months after lockdown? And I think many of us in the market, either we've seen it on our own games or we've seen it in the news somewhere. There was no, there was no limit to what people were doing with games. There was record-breaking player engagement and revenues everywhere. The stay-at-home orders caused a spike to gaming activity basically across the world, and it affected consumer habits. Now, another thing that I would like to start before I dive into this, the pandemic, the lockdowns, they didn't fundamentally change how the games market worked, but they accelerated a lot of the trends that we saw. And that's what I'm going to be sharing as well. So what happened? Well, in short, you see it on the left, the motivations for playing, they changed. Not entirely, but they did broaden. People were playing more genres. They were having more play sessions. They were playing for longer, and there was more viewing as well. And on the right, a couple of call-outs, record-breaking engagement between those first months. Animal Crossing will be coming back as well. Fastest selling game on the Nintendo Switch, 13 million copies sold in 6 weeks. Mobile game revenues, I showed that at the start already. Steam broke its concurrent user record 4 times in a matter of 4 weeks, reaching almost 25 million concurrent users in the first week of April. So a lot of people were playing games. Now, let's break down those different behaviors step by step. And the first thing that I'll talk about is the motivations for playing. On the right, the graph, we did a study among players in the US, Japan, and Italy. Because at the time we did the study, the situation for lockdowns were quite different in those countries, and they were most heavily impacted at the time. Well, US was a bit later, maybe. The first motivation shouldn't be a surprise. People had more time because they were stuck at home. So they spent more of that time playing. But I want to call your attention to the second and third reason, which is, or actually second, third, and fifth, which is a means to socialize, escaping the current situation, escapism, and that friends and family started playing. And when we look at the games that did well this year, particularly, that means to socialize, that friends and family effect, it affected a lot of what the popular games were. And I keep coming back to Animal Crossing because it came out at a perfect time. Right when people were stuck at home, here's this social simulation game. You can visit your friend's island, and that just caused a bubble effect for Animal Crossing. And the game would have done well regardless. I have no doubt that, but it's the records that were broken were definitely due to the lockdown, and people started getting creative, hosting weddings that were canceled by the lockdown in Animal Crossing. There were talk shows there. So really interesting to see people use that social space for things that weren't even related to the main game. Another example, of course, the concerts that were performed within Fortnite. And below some examples of the other games that were highly driven by a social experience that really took off this year. And I want to explore that concept of using gaming space as a social space a bit more, even though that's not strictly related to lockdown, but definitely something that we saw boosted through lockdown. It's the concept. I don't want to mention, I feel like I have to mention metaverse, although it's not my favorite idea, but it's the idea that gaming spaces can be social spaces and can be social spaces that don't even have to have that gaming element. That's a very interesting thing, and that's something that we definitely saw this year, and that was led by Fortnite and Fortnite's Party Royale modes, where they hosted movie trailers and music performances, and those drew a lot of viewers and a lot of attention. And in the graph on here, you'll see that these were live viewers, so or live hours watched while the event was happening. There was over 12 million people that watched the concerts of Steve Aoki, deadmau5, and Dylan Francis in May. 8 million people watched Travis Scott perform live in Fortnite. And now recently, Roblox has been doing sort of the same, and the numbers are still a bit lower, but Lil Nas X performance just last weekend, 2 million or close to 2 million live hours, but 33 million views on social media already. So this idea that games can offer this immersive social experience that rivals or even beats social media, that's a very interesting concept to me, and hopefully for you guys as well. Just a second. So what happens with genres? Remember, another thing that happened was the genres. And what I did here, highlight 3 genres and 2 games that we've seen. Again, mostly the games we've seen come back. Those are really hyped games this year. But first, calling attention to the genres, of course, I acknowledge it's not just lockdowns. The fact that shooter by viewership hours grew 62% was also because Call of Duty Warzone launched, and that was a hyped game, and that would have done well regardless. But again, due to people being stuck at home, that just ballooned the effect. More interesting, perhaps, is the growth in interest in simulation games, and Animal Crossing had an effect here, but it's the idea that people were doing things that you can't do because you are stuck at home. So the whole simulation aspect, that spoke to a lot of people, and that's an interesting effect that is definitely attributable to lockdowns. And racing was a key example of that, because the Formula One season specifically got caught off. And what happened, because the drivers were trained in, like, they would used to do their own training, they still do their own training in racing sims, and they simply moved it online, and the attention that it got was amazing to see. So almost 100% growth, and in terms of total hours, it doesn't compare to what shooters did, but it's an interesting effect. Among Us, Fall Guys, you can see here on the right, this is a graph by player share, and Among Us right now is at 16.5% PC player share. That means that one in every 6 PC players played Among Us in October. 1 every 11, I guess, played Fall Guys in August, and that's to say that Fall Guys probably peaked more in console as well. Yeah, and simply because it's escapism and it's social. So very interesting to see how genre preferences can change in these situations. Same thing we saw with average daily playtime that spiked in the months following the lockdown. And again, I highlighted some stats that we tracked here. In March, when the stay-at-home orders begin, we basically saw an increase in average playtime per day for all of these games here. So the top line is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Apparently people that played it a lot in a day. Doesn't mean that is the most played. This is average playtime per day, so keep that in mind. But the same for all these games: Apex, Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, all of them saw a spike in playtime per day, meaning people were just spending more time in their day playing games. And what's very interesting as well, at least to me, is that some of that stuck. So now when we're in, say, yeah, it's a bit difficult to say because some countries, we're not out of the COVID situation yet, but the idea of permanence is a key question, and I'll address that at the end of the presentation as well. But how much of this effect is permanent and how much is just temporary? Well, it's very early days to say that, but if I'm looking at these lines, it means that at least some of that engagement stays high. So again, maybe a good sign for the future. Live streaming, same situation, actually very extreme growth between February and April, and 17.8 billion hours watched gaming content watched on Twitch and YouTube Live combined already. 70% growth compared to the same period in 2019. So it's not just people playing games, it's people watching games as well. And what that has also meant is that something that we expected to grow maybe a lot earlier has finally, hit the spotlight, mobile esports. And of course, that's driven by, for example, the three games we're looking at here. So PUBG Mobile, Garena Free Fire, Mobile Legends, Bang Bang. But this is just one of those interesting trends that I felt was worth calling out, because it's something that we had anticipated and something that we've seen in particular Asian markets, looking at China, Southeast Asia, where mobile esports was already drawing some viewership, but now it's finally stepped into the limelight, probably because of lockdown and the increased intention for gaming that came because of that. Let's see. So there's a lot of text on this slide, and I know that, but I'm going to talk to this all because I think this is quite an important one. So far, I've been speaking some about the player change, behavior changes, engagement changes, and what does that mean for the money, the revenues, and how much this is actually translate into revenues for the global market. Well, quite a lot. As you can probably have seen already, the lockdown measures led to an 17.8 billion positive impact to our games market forecast, with mobile gaming being a main beneficiary. And I'm going to unwrap this increase by platform because I think that's the easiest way to approach it. So just very briefly, what we did to get to this number is we looked at our forecast for 2020 previous to COVID. So this was the forecast that we launched in January. And then we looked at it, the one that we saw in October, the one that we made in October. And that's still technically a forecast because we're still in 2020, but this is a far higher degree of certainty, let's put it that way. So let's start at the top at console. An extra 4.2 billion was made on console this year. And where did that come from? What was the main drivers for this increase? Well, first, and that's for me as a market analyst, at least one of the most interesting things, is there was a boost in hardware sales for the PS4 and the Xbox One generation, which is very remarkable because we're now we were in the last year. Now there's a PlayStation 5, there's the Xbox Series. And normally that would mean those consoles wouldn't sell as well this year because why buy an old console in April if you can buy the new one, if supply allows, in November. But that didn't stop people from buying it. And if you're buying a hardware, then you're buying games. So it just, it's a snowball effect there. Same thing for the Nintendo Switch. That was actually sold out globally or at least mostly sold out globally for the first 6 months of the year. A lot of that was driven by Animal Crossing, but it's also just very strong backlog, very recognizable characters. Continued growth in revenue and engagement for existing games, and it's connected to more people buying the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. that install base growing, that means just that, more people are buying games, more people might be paying for in-game transactions, and that's just growing revenue in general. And the fourth advantage, or the fourth growth drive for console, particularly driven by the lockdown, is that it's the most visible form of gaming for newcomers or for lapsed gamers, so people that played in the past but are now coming back to gamers. Why is that? It has the highest marketing budgets, at least. Marketing budgets, I'm not talking about the user acquisition strategies that some mobile game developers mostly and the more longer term PC and console gamers employ, but this is advertising, advertisements, TV advertisements, creating that visibility. And of course, the retail exposure that console has over the other three platforms. If you go to a GameStop or a Game UK, chances are that 90%, if not all of it, is dedicated to console gaming. So if you're a new player, you're unfamiliar with what your options are, chances are that you're going to end up in console gaming. There were some downsides as well. Some highly anticipated titles got delayed, including Halo Infinite for the Xbox Series, and that lowered the spending a bit. And I think another one, that's the disruption of the supply chain for the next generation consoles. And not so much the disruption of the supply chain, but the fact that the install bases now are probably lower than Microsoft and Sony would have hoped there to be at this point. Moving on to mobile, the highest increase out of all three at 11.8 billion. Why is that? Well, it has the lowest barrier to entry. There's nearly 4 billion smartphones in use globally this year. So a lot of people have a smartphone, and that's all you need to start playing mobile games. The smartphone, go to the App Store, download a game, and there you go. So no need to buy a console, no need to buy a PC. And another thing that very helped, and this is mostly coming from those Asian markets that, as we saw in the beginning, are the biggest gaming markets anyway, was the temporary closure of PC cafes and the ongoing hesitance of people still to go to these PC cafes, even though some of them are already open. That drove a lot of people into mobile gaming, because these markets that I'm talking about, with the exception of Japan, console gaming really isn't a thing. And it's not a lot of people have PCs at home. So what happens if they can't go to the PC cafe, they're playing mobile games, they're playing Honor of Kings, they're playing PUBG Mobile. And that continues even now after the PC cafes are already open. And the least impact to development processes due to the relatively low complexity development. And doesn't mean that it's lower or necessarily lower complexity for the game code, etc. But as opposed to console, there's less reliance on voice acting, motion capture technology. There's also less reliance on physical disk being shipped. That caused some delays in console. So the fact that people had to work from home impacted console development more than it did mobile and PC, by the way. But when we're looking at some of the downsides and looking ahead a bit of the permanence as well, the fact that mobile has the lowest barrier to entry also means it has the lower barrier to leaving, because there's no sunk costs. And for the mobile games that are monetized through advertising, if there was just less spend on advertisements, that obviously impacted that as well. Looking to PC, the third one, it has relatively low growth, and I'll go into the reasons right now. So some of the positive growth drivers was the image that PC gaming still has from streaming culture and from esports, that is still mainly done on PC gaming. And as I say in the second bullet, it's still the home of competitive gaming for most people. And that will draw people to PC. Very interesting, for example, in Middle East, where we saw relatively, compared to the average in the global average, relatively high growth for PC gaming. And that was because streamers were getting popular and were turning people to PC gaming. So that is still a very strong growth drive for PC gaming. A return of browser gaming, surprisingly. Not everywhere, not in China, which is the biggest browser gaming market worldwide still. But in the West, I do think that a lot of that will be temporary though, because that type of social browser gaming is typically something that people now play mobile games for. My theory, my assumption is that these were lapsed players, people that stopped playing browser games that now return to the platforms they knew because they had more free time. And PC gaming is less hit-driven than console. So any disruption to the development processes is less impactful because it's more resilient to that. The downsides for PC is that there's still a perceived high barrier to entry. People assume that they have to invest a lot in a gaming PC in order to play PC games. There are ways to get around that now, but that's not very well known yet. Like I'm talking about things like cloud gaming, for example, but there's still that perceived barrier. And the aforementioned PC cafe closure in Asian and emerging markets during lockdown. Whew. So, no surprise, where did all that money flow to? Well, we saw even more consolidation in the industry this year, as opposed to normally. I'm not going to spend too long on this, not going to go through everything, but yeah, to no one's surprise, the biggest companies were the main beneficiary of this increase in gaming engagement and gaming revenues. And finally, one last note. I've been speaking about revenues going up. I've been speaking about engagement going up. What about the player number stat that I showed in the first case? Well, even though the lockdown is very impactful, that is not a main driver for player number. What is the growth in the online population due to better internet infrastructure, affordable data packages, availability of affordable smartphones, support for local payment methods is a big one. If people can't pay for games or for gaming content, then they're not going to turn into a player. And growing middle class is a disposable outcome. And perhaps a stat here that is interesting is that if we're looking at our player forecast for the next couple of years, 3 out of every 4 new players will come from emerging markets like the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia. So even though the lockdown is very impactful on engagement, on revenues, in terms of player numbers, we didn't really see that much of an effect. So yeah, like I said, it's not all positives. The development side for gaming, and possibly some people here might know something about that as well, has taken a hit. Lockdown means more spare time to play, but a disrupted workflow and value chain. And there are some delays, some of which we've listed here. Games that luckily have now been able to release, but Halo Infinite being a big one, of course, for Microsoft and the Xbox launch. And I'm sure they would have loved to have that. We pulled some here from the GDC State of the Industry survey, where 1 of 3 developers reported that the game was delayed to COVID-19. We did a survey ourselves among developers where 3 out of every 4 developers said that it had a positive effect on game performance, but almost half said that it had a negative effect on development. So just wanted to call out that it's not all positives. But investments in esports games, investments in esports and games viewing keep growing despite the pandemic. And I think I didn't have the stats readily available, but the same can be said for investments in game studios, looking at some of the big name acquisitions that we've just seen this year. Total number of deals is higher already this year than it was in the last 3 years. The total deal volume is already also at a record. So there's still a lot of faith in esports and games viewing, as well as just game development. So slightly positive note as well. Before I end, I did want to, like I said, I promised to talk a bit about the permanence of the COVID effect or the lockdowns. So this is more of a summary of what I spoke before. But what we expect in terms of player growth and in terms of stickiness, high on console, the stickiness, mostly because of the required upfront investment to get the hardware, to get the gaming content. That stickiness is low on mobile because of the lower barriers to entry, lowest barrier to exit, and gaming might become deprioritized when other hobbies are able to resume. PC is somewhere in the middle because PC is much more a mix of players. There's the browser players to address as well. And the last thing I did want to call out is the potential of cloud. And we have some cloud gaming partners that shared their number with us, their user signups in the first months of the lockdown. And that was very, very impressive to see those numbers. I think for cloud, they still have the issue that it's very unclear for the general public what the promise is, what it can do. People still don't really believe that it works. It also needs more of a compelling use case, I'd say. But it has the potential to offset some of these downsides for PC and console gaming. So I did want to call that out as well. And with that, that is what I wanted to share today about the impact of the lockdown on the games market. So I hope you enjoyed and maybe learned something.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was absolutely awesome. I really enjoyed that. And it was really great to have that insight on obviously this circumstance that we're all in at the moment. It was really relevant. So thank you. I really enjoyed that. I love data as well. So it's great to see a background around that as well. I really, really enjoyed it. So anyone that's watching, please put some questions in the Q&A panel. I actually had a question for you, Tom. So maybe we can start there. Obviously, with a lot of the growth that companies have seen over this sort of period, with a lot more people playing their games, I see a lot of companies sort of reacting in a way that they kind of grow, that they're looking to grow in line with that big boost that they've seen from additional players. Do you think that's the best way to go at the moment? How do you think companies could kind of invest this extra revenue that they're seeing? Do you think we need to be cautious how we grow in companies, or how do you kind of see the market changing next year? Would you say that, you know, this is going to continue as a trend, or?
No, so I would be very careful to assume that the growth rates and engagement that you see this year you're not going to be able to repeat that under normal circumstances. Yeah. And particularly if you're into mobile gaming, then I would recommend a bit of playing it safe. That said, there's a lot of reason to invest more than you would in retention right now, because if you are able to retain at least, you know, a large part of these new gamers or more engagement, if you can sustain even some of that, then that is worth investing in. So maybe to sum it up,
thank you.
You know, manage your expectations, but don't be afraid to invest right now.
Okay, that's good. So yeah, invest, but be cautious. Fantastic. So we do have some questions here. And the first one's from Stephen, and he asks, are there any specific reasons why developers answered that there was a negative impact on game development?
Oh, I would have to check the survey data. I don't have that top of mind. But I think recalling it, the main reason was just adjusting. Yeah, now that I think about it, the main reason was adjusting to working from home and managing work-life balance.
Okay, interesting. Well, we do send out a mail to follow up after the event. So maybe I'll ask you if you have any more on that one as well, and we can send it over. But no, thank you. That's fantastic. And we have another question here, which is what reasons that caused the game dev delays? So what were the reasons that caused the game dev delays during the pandemic, regardless of engagement, that keep rising with no new games coming out?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I don't.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to it's here on the box if you want to read it as well, but it says, what reasons that caused the game development delays. So I think it's what are the reasons that caused the game development delays during the pandemic, and this is regardless of the engagement that keeps rising with no new games coming out. Sorry, my bad.
No worries, no worries. So the reasons why games got delayed, quite diverse reasons. First of all, there were just a couple of studios that weren't comfortable releasing during the height of the pandemic. I don't know. I think this was before most people knew that actually people were starting to play a lot of games. And they were just, well, now is a weird period, so maybe not release right now. Then there were a few examples of, these were mostly the big budget AAA games that they couldn't guarantee that the physical distribution could be on a global scale at the level that they would. And rather than disappointing part of the player base, they chose to delay the launch altogether. Then there were other studios that were still earlier in the development process that were hit by things like motion capture that couldn't be done when people were stuck at home, voice acting that had to change. They had to ship like the hardware to do that to people rather than just having them come into the studio because their studios were closed. And like I said to the previous question, just the fact that people were, all of a sudden had to en masse work from home, change their setups, change their work-life balance, that just caused delays.
Fantastic, thank you. And I have another question for you, actually. If anyone else has any, now's the time to pop them over. Last chance, but I had one for you. What was your favorite game that you played during lockdown? Did you have a lockdown game that sort of helped you get through those early months, or?
I think the most unusual one that I played, so I got through a lot of my backlog, so that was very nice. Most unusual one that I played, I guess, was Planet Coaster. I'm not I'm not much of a simulation gamer normally, but it hit the right spot at the right time, I guess.
Cool. And we've actually had one come through in the chat, but I will ask that now. So do you think that digital sales will increase over physical sales after the lockdown?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, that's one of those trends that got massively accelerated due to the lockdown.
I suppose it's interesting as well. Obviously, a lot of the new gen or now current gen consoles have versions that don't even accept physical copies anymore, that are digital only.
Yeah,
so
yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, but this might be a personal belief or personal hope rather than a well-informed market analyst one, but given the price hike of the next generation games, there might be a little resurgence for box games. I know I bought box games for the first time in years, so who knows? But I think in general, yeah, definitely this accelerated that shift to digital distribution.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. That was really insightful. I really enjoyed that. And
cool.
You've got your details there on the screen as well. So
yeah, I kept them on for a while so that people,
awesome.
if you want to reach out, then hopefully by now you've noted it down. I'll stop sharing. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. No, please. But thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it, especially so late in the year. It's been really great to have you with us, and it would definitely be great to have you again. And yeah, we'll let you get on. Mario, hopefully you're still here. And thank you, Tom.
I'm still here.
Hey, hey, Mario. So how are you doing? You ready?
I am ready. I'm ready. Let me start the presentation. Give me a second. I'm going to show.
It's still good to see that you have your madness background as well. It looks like you're right there.
Yes, I still missing being the office, but well, in those days it is not an easy thing. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Mario. I'll get out of your way as well and let you get on. Everyone, as always, if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A panel and we'll ask them at the end. Thanks a lot, Mario. Take it away.
Perfect. Okay. Here we are going to start with this, no time to lose. Okay, the content we are going to see today is executive summary, problem, solution, benefits, conclusion, and question and answer. A little explanation why we are see this today? Well, because in my experience, a small game always appears and we must deliver that game in a short time and with a hard deadline. Today, we're going to see how to address that situation. Okay, let me introduce myself. I am a senior Unity developer working in Product Madness. I have been working in the video game industry for more than 15 years. I am a developer. I also teach. I worked in at least more than 20 published games and more unpublished. I worked in so many different companies, game studios, different size, different company cultures, and also I am a gamer. But first of all, we need to understand what is the problem. Well, a new game has arrived, everyone is so excited, it's so funny, everything looks great, there is new ideas, new genre, a new team. We start to think about the team, the technology, the identity, the art, the target audience. But in one moment, we start to think about, well, but there is something more very important, the deadline. Well, the deadline, some cases we are not able to address in the way like we are not able to change it. And this is one of those cases. We need to deliver a game in a specific date. Why? Because the end of a fiscal year, a movie release, a published date, or what else. It's not really important that. But usually a game takes us a year. We're going to use an example. And if we do the estimation with the deadline, it's going to be 6 months. Okay, 6 months is more time. We're going to don't have so much time. We do an early estimation and we start to think about, well, the planning, the pre-production, production, test, polish, pre-launch and launch. We are not going to care about post-launch because we are going to be thinking about how to be able to address the situation to launch a game in only this small amount of time. And what is the real problem here? The delays. Usually the delays is a very common problem when you are developing a video game. It is not easy to create a game. And if it is, even if it's a small one, it's a big one, AAA, every game has the same issue. It's not easy. Try to avoid the delays. You can see the last good example, Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk, they try to release during this year and they delay it. They suffer a few problems. They work it overtime and they delay it again. And if I am not wrong, I believe they're going to release the game the next month. But this is only one example of what is the problem. It's a very common problem in the industry. Every game suffers this kind of problem. But for us, that is not a solution because we have a hard deadline and we must deliver the game in that time. Okay, what is the solution? We need to save time, minimize the delays, and handle the detours. Well, first, we need to understand what is the minimal viable product. What is the essential thing or the essential features we need to deliver our game because we don't have so much time. We need to be very smart selecting what we really need to deliver our game. Okay, it's the moment of the definition and our friends say, well, you must choose, but choose wisely. And that is a very good advice. We're going to start with the genre. The genre, usually I recommend try to use a genre you already have been working because you already know, you have the know-how, you're going to save time and you're going to avoid detours. But if that is not an option, try to at least look for a genre has a simple mechanic because you don't have so much time. For a key mention, try to look for something you have been working. If you have been working in Unity, continue using that, or the same happen with Unreal. Don't try to use a new version of the game engine. Art. The art, try to look for a style and identity you are going to be able to deliver in the time frame you have. Because if you select a AAA content for art, well, perhaps you are not going to have the time. And when I say perhaps, you are not going to have the time to create the game you are trying to achieve. That is the thing. Agile, use Agile. Always is going to help you. And also try to have a small, short sprints. I always recommend the first 2 months, try to have very, very short, perhaps 1 week sprint, and perhaps you can, after that, start with 2 weeks sprint, but it's up to you. But usually I recommend very short because it's, from the beginning, it's more complicated if it's very long, the sprint. And another thing is avoid new tools. If someone told you the last version of Unity is going to have this thing, it's not for you. No, this alpha version or this beta version has something amazing. No. Try to look for tools you have been working before, and try to look for version has long-term support, and try to select those versions, and those versions you are going to use for the whole period of time you are going to develop this game. Well, you need to select your team. Usually, I recommend for a small game with a very short time, select seniors, because seniors are going to work more efficiently, and something very important is they're going to create content, and the thing they're going to create is going to be good. But in what way? They're going to fill gaps and create things you really need to. Usually if a junior, a middle is doing something, that thing perhaps has problems, but or is well done, but usually the seniors are able to see problems you are not able to see right now. Okay, every game starts as a prototype. That means a game starts as a prototype, is iterated, and then is turned into the final game. That means the main purpose of the prototype is validate the game mechanics, the core game loop. If you are not able to achieve that, you are going to have issues. Why? Because if you try to create a game without achieve the core game mechanic, you are not going to have a north start. It's in this way. I worked in a game for more than a year, and in one moment someone said, well, it's enough, we're going to stop working in this game. And I said, why? Well, we never was able to achieve the core game mechanics. They decided to select, after 2 months of working in pre-production, they say, we arrived, we almost have the core game mechanics, we're going to find that on production. Well, usually in production, you must found the core game mechanic and then pass to production, because production is very expensive, and any change you take in production is going to be something you are going to pay in time and in resources. For that reason, usually the iteration process should be in pre-production. It's not must should be, if it's must be. Well, and well, the golden rule I have is always achieve the core mechanic in pre-production. If you are not able to do that because you are out of time, well, speak and try to get a new MVP, reduce the time of production, and make that happen. Because believe me, look for the core game mechanic in production is very complicated, and usually it's a very bad decision. And I did that. Well, I worked in a game that did that, and was a terrible experience. Okay, performance. No one wants to play a game works slow or has freeze. That is the real thing. For that reason, we need to start from the early beginning, checking how many frame rate per second we have, how many draw calls we have, how many calls to the garbage collectors, how much memory it is consumed. But something important is we need to understand the game is going to run in devices. And we need to understand like the target devices and the minimum devices, we need to make the game work for those. The target devices is going to be the device we know must work. We can say, I don't know, the last iPhone. The last iPhone, our game was worked perfectly in the last iPhone. But for, we can say, a very old iPhone or a very old Android, the game must work or should work at least in a playable way, we can say. Well, to achieve that, we need to try from the beginning, try our game into those devices. And that is going to help us to understand is working well or no. Usually happening this way. You try your game in the target devices like the last iPhone and everything worked well. But let me tell you, so many times happen, I test in low-end devices and was not working well. This is not a promise you do from the beginning because you can figure out what is the issue. Perhaps it's something from in the code, sometimes it's something related with the art, but if you do at the early beginning, you can address that and you can select in this way. Well, first I'm going to fix this, then I'm going to change that. For example, I could change the asset or I could fix the program, but the main thing is if you try to do that at the end of the development, it's not going to be good because perhaps you need to change a lot of art and also you need to change a lot of code. Okay, your own tools. Well, something you need to understand is the content you are going to create for the application is not going to make by a developer. No, it's going to be created for so many different people. Usually a good advice is has a localization file. Even if you don't have an external localization file, a tool for localization, even if you have only one language. Why? Because the people from product usually like to change the entries of localization. I don't know why, but they like to change that. The main idea is everyone must be able to change those entries without change the development itself. The same happened with the labels, the map, and character. Usually a game has editor for those things. Why? Because the content is going to be created for a level designer, a game designer, an artist. And the main thing is those guys must be able to create that content without the interaction of a developer. Usually, I always suggest to create a small tools, simple and easy to maintain, because in that way you are going to save time and you are going to reduce the detours. Okay, the art. Well, the art itself is the identity of the game. It's a mix of the gameplay and the art, the identity, but it is very important. And for that reason, we need to start working with art from the early beginning. And how we can achieve that, because it's very complicated, because we are not able to ask to the artist to create the final art when we are starting. Well, we ask for placeholders. Those placeholders we are going to add into our game and we're going to use until we receive the final art. But the placeholders, they are going to be in this way. They are going to be like, they're going to have the same specification that the final art, but they're not going to look like the final art. Why? Because they're going to make very fast, but they're going to achieve a lot of things, and we are going to be able to include in our game, and we are going to be able to test that. And if we test that, we're going to see how to look like in the device we are going to run. Always try the art and the game in the device, because if you don't try there, you are going to have problems, because the game is going to run in a device. We always define workflow with art that let us create art in a very performant way. And another tip, and this tip is very important, is avoid last minute integration. What happened? Usually, I don't know why, but the art came the final art came the last week. And you say, really, the last week? Yes, the last week. And you say, no, 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 no. Well, but you need to integrate the entire art in only 1 week, and you start to do, well, you need to change things, because the art usually is not a straightforward works, and you need to sometimes you need to change things related with the art, and it's not going to look like you expected, or the performance could be decreased. But because you don't have time, the game is going to suffer, the quality of the game is going to suffer. Okay, communication. If we learned something about Among Us, is if someone see a dead body, you must communicate. Well, here is the same. Usually I recommend daily meetings, but the main thing you need to understand is if you see something wrong in the game, into the game, you must speak about that. Speak out about that. Because I remember has been fixing something, I found that, I say, oh, this thing doesn't work well. And someone aside me told me, yeah, I saw this problem 3 weeks ago. Why you don't say anything about that? I need to fix that. And if I fixed that before, was less work to do right now. Well, usually communication is the key, and the people must speak when they see something, and even if they think it's not important, it is. Well, the benefits. We're going to release in time, we're going to have less friction on the team, we are going to have the game we wanted, a good team spirit, no overtime, we are going to be all in the same page. In conclusion, if you must deliver a small game in a short time with a hard deadline, you need to save time, minimize delays, and handle the detours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. That was awesome. It was really good to hear you speak as well. So thank you so much. And anyone that has questions, please add them now. We do have a couple here. I've got one for you, Mario. So obviously you've worked on console and mobile games. So you've worked on kind of different platforms.
Yeah.
But do you still think the same planning principles apply for both of those platforms?
Well, yes and no. It depends, because if you must deliver a small game is one thing. If you deliver a big game, it's different. But usually, develop for a console is a little more easy in a few aspects. You only have 1 or 2 hardwares, and if your game work for that one is you usually have a lot of hardware there. But for mobile, it's a little more complicated because you have so many different devices, and that create sometimes it's more complicated. You need to have more QA, more art, and usually it is an issue.
Okay, thank you. And we do actually have a couple of questions here. So the first one from Fulvio, actually both of the questions are, but the first one is there any other specification between a pre-production and production environment in a mobile game besides the back end?
Well, usually the pre-production you must look for backend, you say?
Correct, yes, yes.
Well, for the backend side, usually is not the part, this is more for the client side working in some way, but for the server side, usually is almost the same. You must first know what do you need. If you don't know, it's going to be very complicated to define what you really need. That is the thing.
Fantastic. No, thank you. And we have one from our very own Stefan. So hi, Stefan. So what was the toughest project that you worked on and why?
Oh, yeah. I worked in so many different projects. I remember I'm not able to say the name of that project because I signed a few things related with that, but I remember have been working until so long, so long hours. And when we was very near to the end of the game, they decided to add a new device because this device is going to be shown in those places. And I remember had been working during the weekend to deliver that game. And for that reason, I remember very well, it was a success. We win an award related with that game, but yes, usually if that was addressed before, we should not have to work so many hours.
Oh, you hear a lot sometimes with games that they have crunch right before the end. So no, thank you. So we've got a few more now. So from Jason, so great you're here as well. Do you think doing optimizations early during the development phase could potentially be harmful?
Well, the real thing related with optimization is should be permanent thing. You should be start from the beginning until the end. You must do every week or every 2 weeks because you don't have so much time. You must understand if your game is working well.
Great, thank you. So we've got one from Tom here. What is the proudest game you worked on and how did the production flow go on that project?
I didn't get the first part, sorry.
Oh, sorry, so what is the proudest game you worked on? So what is the game you're the proudest of? And how did the production flow go on that project?
Oh, well, the game I'm most proud of, well, usually it's going to, well, every game I work at, I feel proud. Because I really feel like it's my baby. And it is very complicated because create the small games and big games, they're always a challenge, but I could say work a game for Cars 3 for Disney was the best one. I feel very proud for that one.
Awesome. So I have another question from Fulvio. So how do you manage the mock-ups from the artist? I mean, if it is necessary to set different requirements from the devs that the artist must follow to build the mock-up.
Well, no, usually that is a bad idea. A developer must not create the mockups. That is a terrible idea. The mockups must always be made by an artist because if the artist doesn't create the mockup himself, it's going to be like your interpretation about what the artist is going to need to do. No, that is a wrong thing. You must speak with the artist, make an agreement, and they must create that placeholder.
Great. So I have one more here, and then one that I'd actually like to bring Tom back for as well afterwards. So this one's from Nick. So do you have any advice or strategies for choosing what should be in an MVP, especially when you feel everything should be in the MVP?
Oh yeah, well that is well that is the real issue. The people believe everything is in the MVP, and well, it's usually the people believe the most important thing in the MVP is you must achieve everything. No. For me, for my point of view, the MVP always must be the core game mechanic, the art enough, at least 1 or 2 levels, and an amazing experience. And even if you don't have integrated the world, for example, how you are going to the plugins, for example, you can say, well, perhaps you need to remove the last week the integration with ads. That is not a problem because perhaps you can add that after the launch. The most important thing is the game must be an experience you enjoy because you don't play the game for the ads. You play the game for because the game is amazing.
Mhm.
That is the real thing.
Great, thank you. So this last one, I think we can all kind of get involved with, and I'm going to actually take a stab at it to start with. So it's a question from panelists. So thank you for this. So it's a generic question, not addressed to any specific speaker. Why do you think the video games industry is so closed in terms of joining for work? It seems to me that if one didn't start his or her career in video games, it's almost impossible to join the industry at a later point, at least without sacrificing a massive part of the salary. So I'm really happy to have a go at this one. So I'm head of talent acquisition here at Product Madness. I worked previously at Mediatonic and Gobo as well as their recruitment managers. And this is something I agree, and it's always been really difficult. I think it's almost this sort of preset mindset we have in the games industry that everyone that comes in must be from games. They'll never be able to adapt, never be able to learn. But I do see it's a change, something that's happening slowly, that people that you know, the games industry is looking in other places, isn't demanding everyone's a graduate that comes into the industry, because I also think that's a big block to coming into our industry as well. I agree a lot of the time. You know, I personally came from corporate and had to take that drop to come into games when I joined 4 years ago. Part of it's to do with demand as well, though. So, you know, in gaming, it's a passion. It's something you do as a passion. We love games, you know, and we want to work on them. And I think historically, games companies have known that people want to work on games. You know, I suppose people don't always dream of working on the back end of a big HSBC financial system. So those people get paid huge money because it's, you know, it's not what you dream of, but working on a game is. But I think it is slightly changing. I mean, personally with our studio, we have a lot of people that come from tech that join our organization. We're not always like your traditional game studio. But I think that is a really good question. That's the reason I wanted to obviously bring you back, Tom. You have a really good view of the industry. And Mario, you've been at lots of different studios. So maybe we start with you, Tom. But you know, what do you think about that barrier of coming into the games industry?
Yeah, I definitely realize that it's there, and that there is such a thing. And some points that you touched upon as well. I think, and I'm going to speak from my experience is similar to yours. I came from corporate, took a pay cut, and came into games. And I think the slightly different perspective is because the company I work is very much ingrained in the games industry, but we're not a game developer. And now that I'm more on the, you know, taking the applicants and taking the interviews, we still see the same thing. And we get a lot of candidates that are like, well, I've always been passionate for games, but I can't develop or I can't code. So I thought there was never a future in games for me. And that's a lot of people. So in the same way, we are also in a luxury position to say that we can have our pick of the litter, so to say, because people are passionate, and it's a passion thing. And that's why they want to work in games. And that's I think why it's so hard to be in games is also because we and I think most, if not all, game companies can have indeed the luxury to say, well, you don't need to just be good at what you're supposed to be doing, but if you have if you can prove your passion for games, and how one way to do that is by having worked in games before, and that's, I guess, why it's reinforcing itself as being such a close industry. And I see the same thing even for us, like working in data and analytics and market sizing, forecasting, that kind of thing. You don't have to have a background in games at all. But if you do, you just have a leg up on the people that still have to learn the industry. So it's part luxury, it's part something I think that we're a little bit stubborn in the industry, I think, and potentially something that we can look to change. On the other hand, it's very difficult to change because you have to knowingly, you know, accept that not everyone has the same level of understanding of the market that you're in. But something that's easily picked up. But yeah, it's luxury.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point. So I really agree with that. And Mario, from your perspective, I suppose as well, obviously you've come into the games industry, which is really hard to break into as a developer, and then have all of this experience. How did you find it? How was your journy, getting into the industry?
My journey is a little strange. I'm going to make quick, but the main thing was I used to work in a family work. Is the in a family shop? Is the newspaper stand. And my wife and my best friend showed me a magazine and say, "You can live making games." Really? Now, really, I could live making games. Now I'm looking. Well, I started to study. It was no easy because I study and work at the same time. And when I finished the study, I say, well, I would like to live doing something I really like. I have been working in something I hate, and I would like to work in something I love. And in one moment, I started to work in different games, in different studios. I started to teach and say, how that could be possible. I worked in a AAA game. I worked in Disney also, and in one moment, well, I decided to move to UK. Well, this is the short story, but for me, it's an amazing journey working video games. It's unbelievable, and I think so. There is a lot of people could work here, and they don't really know that.
Yeah. I agree. I think we're really all lucky to be here. It's an amazing industry to work in. It's great when a new game comes out and everyone that's around you, you can talk to them about it, and there's lots of passion all around you for games. It's a great industry to be in. So I think I think that's a really nice way to end it. So thank you both for all of your time. It's really great to get your insights, and both your talks are fantastic. So thank you. Thank you to everyone that took your evening as well to listen and to join us. This talk will actually be recorded and it will go up on YouTube hopefully tomorrow. If you couldn't tell, I'm actually on a 4G dongle here. I'm in temporary accommodation, so I don't know how long it'll take me to download the video and re-upload it, but hopefully it'll all be good, and we'll try and get that up for you tomorrow. And thank you for joining. So the next event, we actually have a Unity developer event that'll be coming up next month, so we'll have more information on that soon. And the next London Games Network will likely be February, March time next year, and we'll have more info on that to follow shortly. But I just want to say thanks again, Mario. Thanks, Tom. You've both been amazing. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm really looking forward to the next event. Have a good evening. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Good evening.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.